absolutely delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much for coming. And it's clear that this is really an important topic that religious life and others are finding a call to. And so we have a wonderful evening planned with you. So I would like to first introduce, as a welcome from CTU, Sister Barbara Reed, a Dominican and the president of Catholic Theological Union.
Thank you, Maria. Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Sister Barbara Reed, President of Catholic Theological Union, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome you this evening to this very important conversation on religious engaging in synodality. For those of you who are new to CTU, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about who we are. Catholic Theological Union is a union of 24 men's religious communities that are the corporate owners of the school, whose seminarians study here alongside lay women and men and women religious from more than 40 communities from around the US and really around the whole world. Our mission is to prepare effective leaders for the church, ready to witness to Christ's good news of justice, love, and peace. The Center for the Study of Religious Life, the Study of Consecrated Life at CTU was founded in 2015 to serve as a theological, academic, and pastoral resource for engaging contemporary issues and realities in consecrated life today from a global perspective. And we're truly delighted to share with you the recent news that we have been granted a new grant from the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, their Catholic Sisters Initiative. Our project is Moving Along the Arc, Women Religious as Agents of Reconciliation and Transformative Action Toward a More Racially Just Church and World. I know a number of you were with us last spring when we had a series entitled A Call to Transformative Love in Religious Life, Stories of Race, Place, and Grace. And so we're building on our learnings from that series, and we're again partnering with the National Black Sisters Conference in this new series. Please stay tuned for more information. We hope you will join us often for conversations like these or to take a course at CTU. Please take a look at our website at ctu.edu for all of our offerings. And now I want to introduce to you Colleen Kennedy, who is our Vice President for Institutional Advancement at CTU, and she will introduce you to our speakers.
Good evening. My name is Colleen Kennedy, and I am Vice President for Institutional Advancement here at CTU, a colleague of Sister Barbara and Sister Maria. And I add my welcome to all of you. I have the great pleasure of introducing tonight's conversation partners. Professor Rafael Luciani is an expert of the Theological Commission of the General Secretariat of the Synod of Bishops and faculty at the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, as well as the Universidad Católica Andrés Bello in Caracas. An engaging speaker, Professor Luciani presents nationally and internationally. He currently serves as expert of CILAM, the Latin American Episcopal Council, and member of the Theological Advisory Team of the Latin American Confederation of Religious, otherwise known as CLAR, CLAR. He is also an expert of the Theological Commission of the General Secretariat of the Synod of Bishops. Welcome, Rafael. And joining Rafael is Sister Maria Cimperman, my colleague, an associate professor of theological ethics here at CTU and the founding director of the Center for the Study of Consecrated Life. Maria has co-edited with Roger Schrader, Engaging Our Diversity, Interculturality, and Consecrated Life Today. This has been published in English, and the Spanish edition will be coming out soon. Her most recent book is Religious Life for Our World, Creating Communities of Hope. And the book now has an Africa edition and is being translated into Spanish. Sister Maria has recently been named by the Union of International Superiors General and the Union of Superiors General, Women Religious and Men Religious, to a 4-person commission, which created a process for congregations and will encounter the responses from religious congregations like yourselves and offer a synthesis for the Synod on Synodality, which brings us all together here tonight. So we look forward to the evening, and I hand this off to Sister Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen and Sister Barbara. And I too want to add my thank you to the Catholic Sisters Initiative at Hilton for the just the privilege of being able to find further ways to minister and to respond to the crying needs in this country, but also beyond, and to do that ever more collaboratively. So it's great to be in partnership with you again. I am just delighted to have time with our friend Rafael, Professor Rafael Luciani. I'm going to kindly allow me to call you Rafael, and to talk about this very important moment in our church and at this time, and what a gift that we're living in it. And then also to ask the questions of what's the call of consecrated life in this, and what's our role, and what are we to learn as well, because ever more we're realizing the walking is together. So just to get a little bit of a sense of your own journey, Rafael, you're named everywhere as the expert on synodality. How did this come about? What was your journey that made synodality as a topic that many people are still getting their mouth around so near and dear and part of your life for a long time?
Thank you, Maria, and on all the invitations coming from CTU. And I welcome also all the people that have joined us today. As a Latin American, the way in which we in the church try to live is in a communal and communitarian way of proceeding. So I think it's in my way of being, in my nature, to have relationships and community life as a core, no, of my option. No? So when I hear synodality, which comes from the word synod, that means walk together, it has to do also with a way of being, with a way of living, with an option to make life a more communal dimension of our own existence. No? So it touches my ecclesial life, but also my social life. And when Pope Francis was elected, he brought this experience from Latin America of how do we work together, in his case as a bishop in Selam, through the Episcopal Conference, and as a religious, as a Jesuit, the way in which religious work in Latin America through CLAR, which women and men are working together in the Confederation of Religious Men and Women. And he also brought the experience of how we make ecclesial life from the bottom to the top, from ecclesial communities up to the parishes and then to other institutions. So I think that all those experiences have in me impacted a lot, and synodality just brought all of this together in a way of being church that I personally have expected and desire for many years. And I see that this is a initiation, it's a start only, but it's a start that we have to take seriously and move forward, or it will not happen, no? Yeah.
So, and that's a helpful context. And it's also why you bring a sense of it, and also why many others are saying, what is it and how is it? And how is it longer in its existence, really, than even Pope Francis's tenure? So would you tell us a little bit about how synodality is really part of the early church and had a central moment and of like burgeoning again in Vatican II, and then what it's calling us to today?
Yes, in fact, when the preparatory document for the synod was being drafted, one of the figures that came up as a model was Saint Cyprian, the bishop of Carthago of the first millennium. And that is because the practice of this bishop had two axes. No, one was taking advice of the presbyters. He always used to say that. But at the same time, after taking that advice, he had to build the consensus with the rest of the people in the local church. So the synodality has to do with this practice of the tradition of the church that we lost throughout the years, and especially we today that have inherited a church that lives in the midst of a crisis, in a clericalist crisis. We lost this dimension of building consensus, of building a church as people of God. And I think this is the novelty for many people that may find this word kind of new in the ecclesial life, but it's rooted in the tradition of the church. And I think this is important that Francis is rescuing this value of our own tradition and expanding it, and in a way that wants to transform the church that we know as we live today.
So it's still the movement then from early church. And when you say that, I'm remembering Bishop Ruiz, I think of New Mexico, had a Common Ground Initiative lecture that I used to have my students in Catholic social thought always read, and they were always amazed. But his comments were, as a bishop, the first thing he did was listen. He went to a parish, he just listened and listened when he did a visit. So he's really part of that earliest tradition in doing so. And as you said, we lost track of that at one point. But what did Vatican II open up that seems to be such a pivotal point for this moment?
Yes, the Second Vatican Council is the current universal consensus of the whole church, but it is received in different ways in the different continents and regions of the world. For Latin Americans, it's more familiar to relate the Second Vatican Council to the ecclesiology of the people of God. And synodality is a deepening of that ecclesiology. I remember when Antonio Spadaro interviewed Pope Francis after his election, and he was asked about his experience of the church, what could define in some words the church. And he said that he was impacted always by Lumen Gentium 12, the church and the sensus fidei, the church as a totality of faithful, the church as people of God. So synodality comes today as a deepening in this reception that Francis opens of the Vatican II. And of course, it's new if in my region or in my continent or in my country, the ecclesiology of the people of God is not as rooted as in other places. So I think the core of synodality has to do with the experience of being a church as a people of God. And that's where we have to focus in order to make this synodal church possible in all places. No?
Thank you for that. And you've said more than once that one of the key documents in there with the people of God is Lumen Gentium. That's just a way of looking forward, that now we're in a new phase of living. Could you say a little more about that?
Yes. When I was studying Lumen Gentium, I had first, for curiosity, to see what Latin American bishops have said before the council about the church. No? And I found that Monsignor Proaño, he was a bishop, famous bishop in Ecuador before the council, and one of the pioneers in the missionary ecclesiology. He said that the council should treat the notion of faithful, because the Pope is one faithful, the bishop is one faithful, laity, religious are one faithful, and we are all equals. No? Lumen Gentium recovers this spirit of being all of us faithfuls and Christi Fideles, which means that we have the same rights and the same duties. And the Pope is not over or above us, or the bishop is not above us. We are all in a relationship that qualifies our own being by baptism and by the participation in the common priesthood. So when Lumen Gentium writes or offers chapter 2, which is the people of God, and the Council Fathers, especially Cardinal Suenens, puts chapter 2 before chapter 3, that is the hierarchy, that's a important significance and a shift in the way the church was conceived. Because first of all is the people of God, the hierarchy is at the service of the people of God as one faithful more in the people of God. The consequence that you were saying about listening is that the hierarchy does not only listen, because that would be like the normal practice they should do in everyday life of the church, but they should participate as one more faithful in the listening process, which is different. That means be one more among the faithful and not be the one who is outside waiting for the faithful to speak with them. So I think this changes the whole way in which we relate to each other as a church if we are understood as people of God.
So what you're saying then is we're all being called to listen. And I have behind me that image of the baptism of Jesus. And it's that sense of, this is my beloved in whom I'm well pleased, and that it's that all of us are the beloved and in whom God is pleased, and we're all being called at this point. So you spoke about listening being very important, but that's not it. That there seems to be then a mutuality, a dialogue, a reciprocity, a mutual listening. Because I think at one point you said, if it's just listening, then it's a survey, but something more is being asked. So could you speak to that?
Yeah, if it's only listening, it becomes an end in itself. So it becomes also a source of mere information that I want to recover from an investigation. But listening in a synodal church means that what I listen binds me in my decision, in my discernment. And that means that, to put it in the example of a bishop, after listening, that bishop cannot take a decision isolated, because the listening is the listening of the Spirit through the mediation of the others, and therefore the bishop is binded by what he has listened of that community, of those people, of those groups, no? So this changes the way in which, as a church, we understand ourselves, because decisions in the church cannot be made from people being outside the processes of listening and discerning. But then we have to think, how do we work together, not only the listening, but also the discernment in common, and the decision-taking in the church, also decision-taking in common, in a common spirit. So I think this is what we are facing now, is a change of the ecclesial culture and of the practice in which we relate to each other in the church, and in the change of the structures, the way they function today. Because if all of this is not addressed, then synodality will be reduced to a mere listening without any effect in the changes that are being required.
And thank you for saying that, because that's always a question that seems to come up. Is it going to be one more process, un más proceso, and then we go back? And yet you're asking something more, and you've mentioned the role of the bishop. Let's move to the role of the whole people of God. So what is the role of the whole people of God listening, and then what?
Yeah, first is to feel empowered, because it's the Spirit that speaks through the life and the experience of each one of us. So when I am being listened, it's the Spirit who is speaking through my life, and therefore the other person is and has to listen to my life. So it is not a concession. So first of all is to feel empowered by the Spirit and therefore every person has to be treated in equal rights because of this presence of the Spirit, and be listened with the same rights because of the presence of the Spirit. No? But then that listening becomes a content that I need to work, because I may say something and you may say another thing, and maybe we do not agree. So we have to find a consensus. And this is what is new in a synodal church. Who forms us in building consensus? I think the church invests little of its formation in consensus building. So it's a new culture that we need to create in seminaries, in faculties of theology, in parishes. And to build a consensus needs to discern together, to pray together, to share time together, because it's a process. It's not simply an outcome that I want to build. And this is another difference, no? Because we all want things to happen. The thing is, how do we do the things to make it happen? Do we do them by ourselves as individuals in an individualistic way, or do we do it in a communal way which reflects the synodal spirit? So that is why this implies a whole change of ecclesial culture that needs to be formed, and we're not prepared yet in many structures to do that. So we need a formation or a change of consciousness and mentality to understand this new way of being and proceeding in the church.
Well, and that's something that on one level, religious life has something to offer as a way of being, because we're talking synodality, but in religious life, we speak about communal discernment. And it requires all those pieces that you're speaking of. It requires relationship. It requires building trust. It requires engaging and listening to one another. It doesn't remove people from different roles, including of particular leadership roles and servant leadership. But it does say that everyone's dignity must also be heard in lots of ways. So that's a helpful link to us too. And it's very interesting. You said Cardinal Sunens was one of the people who helped move the chapter on the people of God forth higher in there. He was also one who in the 50s wrote a powerful little book on the nun in the modern world that was really calling women and women religious here to take seriously their education. He was asking them to step up in lots of ways. And so I think religious women and men have stepped up in lots of different ways. And it's been received differently, but it's been a call of the Spirit as well. What I'm hearing you say too is, this is going to ask us to do formation differently. It's going to ask us to be in our parishes differently, to be in dioceses differently, to engage one another and to build something. And, social trust is one of the things we've really been talking about in my field and in Catholic social thought, and how much that really at times has eroded and in society, but also in the church. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to happen, and yet there's a lot of possibility. How are you, you're on that theological commission, and thank you for that, with the synodal process. What is that looking like in our church today? Where are we now with it, and what's being asked of us? So it began officially in October. What's this moment, and what are some of the processes you're seeing? And there are also some on the website, I think you mentioned.
Yes, it's a moment in the church where many things are happening so fast that we sometimes do not have time to process them. And we may be losing so many positive things that are happening. To think, for example, that in the General Secretariat of the Synod of Bishops would be a commission dedicated to theology and canon law, that was 20 years ago unthinkable. And the message of that is that magisterium, theology, and reform of canon law have to work together. That's a powerful image that is happening today. A commission on spirituality and a commission of methodology and theology working together, that means that there is not a theology done in desks, like I call sometimes a theologian that is only writing in the desk but doesn't know the reality of the people in the streets. And this bringing together these commissions is sending another powerful message. Spirituality, practice of life, and the thinking and reflection of theology have to work together. So this reconfiguration of the Synod of Bishops is already a way of saying we are changing. We're trying at least to open new paths and new ways of proceeding in the church, and let's see how the process goes, no? Another thing that is very, I think, revolutionary in terms of ecclesiology is the way in which the process was conceived, because the Synod is not anymore an event, a one-time event on October in Rome, but a process that already started and was inaugurated. The Synod is already ongoing, is already in its way, and it will end in the October 2023 in the last assembly. But the process starts from the dioceses and other powerful messages, which is the ecclesiology of the local churches. We were used with prior pontificates to a universalistic ecclesiology. And now Pope Francis has taken the path of Pope Paul VI's reception of the council through the ecclesiology of the local churches. That means that these communities in each diocese are the starting point of any process of discernment and reform of the church. That's the way in which this synod was conceived. So if we take all these little things here and there, we start to see a big shift. It will take years to put that into the whole church at all levels, but it's already begun in these small steps and decisions that are being taken. No? And one final example is the word consensus, which 20 years ago was practically never used in prior pontificates, and to hear now, not only in the preparatory document, not only in the Vademecum, but in the speech that Cardinal Grech, the General Secretary of the Synod of Bishops, said during the inauguration of the Synod, that once we do this whole process of the 2 years and a final document is approved by the assembly, we have to go back to the dioceses. This is beautiful. Go back to the people of God and get the consensus in order after that to go to the Pope and submit the final document with the consensus of the whole people of God. So these are words and phrases that are very important to take into account, because they represent a new reception of the Second Vatican Council that started with Pope Francis in 2013.
That's a lot, and that's a powerful process that you're naming, that a theological commission is set up. And I do know some dioceses that have a process in place have invited theologians to be part of that. And so I know some of my theological colleagues are here, so this would be a place to just offer gifts and anything that's needed in this, and both maybe on the diocesan, but maybe on the local, and maybe with religious congregations. So that's, I think, an important piece you mentioned. One of the questions that comes here, I mean, it's powerful that it starts, with these documents and this process in Rome, and that there's a question to us, invitation to the whole people, every diocese to be involved. And in a little bit, I'll speak to the call to religious particularly, and then part of parishes, that every parish, every diocese is asked, mandated, invited, mandated to be part of this process. And then if that happens, then what comes in 2023, that document will then go back to the diocese and they have to ratify it. So it's going to be longer. This is a transformation that's akin or an outflow of what was part of Vatican II that is now saying how we structure also needs transformation. And the people here in religious life will understand that, because religious life has been speaking to the call to be converted, transformed, and revitalized or recreated, and to let the structures that are no longer serving consecrated life and even more the church and the world, to let those go and let something else come forth. So you're talking about a process, a parallel process, maybe different steps, but that's going on, and it speaks to the Spirit doesn't just move in one category. The Spirit is far more creative than any of us. But the question's going to come forth, since there are some bishops in the United States and in other countries that haven't yet started the process. Does that mean their diocese won't be heard, or what do you do? And can you ask, I mean, what's the right of the people of God, the faithful, to ask for a diocesan process, to start one, because anyone, I think, can send in their responses. But what happens when, everyone is not doing this yet? Todavía,
Yes.
no.
And it's part of this new way of understanding ecclesiology, starting from the local churches. That's why the document, the preparatory document, and the Vatican offers a possibility of an individual or a group or an institution to do its own process of discernment of the document and send a proposal directly to the General Secretariat, because we know that bishops, some or many, will be always putting resistance, others more, others less. So if we are speaking here about the people of God, the faithful, as the empowered by the Spirit to let God speak through us, then we have also the right to send our own contribution to the General Secretariat. This is not simply a methodological option that was done. It's part of the same ecclesiology that we are talking that has shifted. So, because if we believe that in the people of God is God speaking, this is the mediation, then we have to have the possibility that the people of God express themselves directly if a bishop in a diocese doesn't want to open the process, no? So it's coherent with the ecclesiology, and it's coherent with the intent of this synod of receiving the contributions of all, not only Catholics, but of all the people that can contribute to the changes of the church. And I think it's a challenge.
It's also an opening, and that seems to be Pope Francis trying to say, where it's possible, go, but there are other venues too. And it's really to be a listening church. And, often, if you think of our Eucharistic liturgies, we are listening at a podium and to the Word of God being broken open, and it's a good thing. I'm going to offer another image that actually came from one of the synodal pieces, if I may, and it was one of the Latin American images. And as you can see here, it's a wonderful image of Pope Francis saying, "I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you." And so to be a listening church, everyone is going to take their turn at that podium. And actually, we would probably say even more today, we would be in a circle. We would have a process of listening to one another. And so I think that's a an element too, and that's in the in one of the documents that came from the synodal website, and that is that there are processes where 6 or 7 people, for example, can come together, people in parishes, and have the questions. And it is about opening the questions even more so that you're not just answering a survey, but to ask, what has been your experience of church, of being people of God? And it's that moment where we will probably hear a lot, both joy and involvement, and also sadness and grief, and the life of the people, and cries, and then to listen, just listen deeply. And then another step is to, having listened, another layer is to share what you were hearing. So to be listening and to begin to integrate some of those areas, and then to go forth again. And that's in many ways a peaceful process. And then when you ask, what are we called to? And it's beautiful the way the document and what we're being asked to ask is not, what do I think? Where do I think the church should go? But it actually says, where do I sense the Spirit calling the church? Which again is an even deeper movement. What am I listening to, and how to go about that? So you're inviting us, all of us are part of this process, to participate in it. You're right too, that we are not well schooled or practiced in dialogue when it's a difficult conversation. And right now, we're not finding many good models of that. But this is also that moment where, in our tradition, we have spaces where we can have that rigorous engagement. John Courtney Murray talked about people locked together in civil debate. And that sense of, I need to, it will only happen truly if we can be honest enough with each other and say, that isn't an image of church, and what is mine, and through that process build relationship enough to go about that. So how are you seeing this happening, or where you've had some experiences in different places? What have you been seeing in Europe, Latin America, the US, anywhere?
Yes, I mean, you said something very important. The tradition and religious life is a source of experiences of how to discern and ways of discerning in many ways, no? So I think religious life can look to the tradition of its own and make a contribution, because communal discernment is something new, because it's not for my order, it's for the church. So in a parish, for example, how can we discern in common the needs of the parish and take decisions in common for that, to that community, no? So I think that the tradition that religious life has can contribute in this moment, particularly to the topic of communal discernment. And the other thing is that if you look the different continents or different local churches all around the world, we are now in a situation that we can learn from experiences that we didn't know before. Sometimes we are too localist, and we see all the bad or all the good in our own locality. And if it's all bad, then we lose hope and we have despair. If it's too good, we think we are triumphalists and everything is perfect. So this is a moment with this synodal process of start getting out of our own bubbles, cultural bubbles, ecclesial bubbles, are trying to look to the others. What is Africa doing, and what is Asia doing? What is Latin America doing? And how can we learn from each other? We are going to start, for example, in the Latin American team of the Synod, to have dialogues with other teams of other continents, with the Africans, for example, because we want to learn a communal practice in Africa, how it is understood and how it is understood in Latin America. So I guess in the US, it's also a moment to learn and from other traditions, from other practices, from other local churches, and not simply get the questionnaire, respond according to my local view, and then that's it, no? So it's also this moment of the global church, as Ranner called it after the council, the world church. It's for the first time that the whole church, not even the Second Vatican Council did it, the whole church is going to be consulted, from a parish to the Vatican itself. I mean, the whole church. This is a lot in the change of our mindset. So I would just suggest that we do not only limit ourselves to our own locality, but to see what others are doing. And I finish with an example that we have talked before because it's a beautiful example. We are in the pandemic and the institution of the parish is in crisis because we have lived almost 2 years in a situation where many parishes have not been open due to the COVID, no? And what are we doing in that reality, regarding to that reality? In Lima, in Peru, the Archbishop took seriously a process of discernment of the parishes and is implementing a process of reforming the institution of the parish, not simply renewing it, but what means today to have a parish. How can a parish today be a non-clericalist institution, and so on. And in Venezuela, my country, we have a 2-year process of a national pastoral assembly, and the topic is the reform of the parishes. So how can we learn from other local churches that they are trying to respond to the current signs of the times and the ecclesial changes that are needed and collaborate? That would be very important in this synodal process, because if not, I'm sad to say that we may be limiting ourselves only to our own local reality, and we need to look beyond that and get hope and have hope from others that are telling us it's possible to change. It's possible for a better future.
And that's excellent. And we need these examples. We need these examples that say, oh, here's a place. And if it's not happening right here, where can I go? And you're right. We tend to want the global, but we see honestly just where we are. Somebody in the chat said, one of the things we will have to do as a church is make sure we speak in the language of the people. And so to make sure I often enough try to, not always my students can tell me if I'm successful or not, but to both use our theological language. So, there's a Trinitarian relational base to this, but also speak to it as building community. And so find ways that the entire people of God can participate. And I'm also glad you mentioned this is the space where everyone is to be consulted, everyone, so that everyone can take calls and take hold of this process. And, when I, think of this, just to offer a couple of thoughts on the particular call of religious life. And then we do want to respond to some of what's going on in the chat. And I appreciate some of you are writing your ideas in there as well. And those are most welcome. I think this is a profound moment for religious life. As part of the whole people of God, because one of the things that, as someone born after Vatican II has heard and has been a great beneficiary of is all the work that went with post-Vatican II. So the reading of the documents, the studying of it, the keeping up with theology, the engaging the ad experimentum times where people left certain ministries and went to the margins and different margins. And people started working together. It wasn't just one congregation in one school and this, but there were just more ways. And so I think religious have had many religious from the beginning of Vatican II, got very involved in it and have been moving along with it. And this is another moment asking something of us. So in religious life, we'll talk about presence a lot. Well, this is where our presence is being asked to go into that parish, into those spaces, or to create spaces for these conversations. So they may be happening in your diocese and in your parish, but the question is, so many of us have influence still, or at least relational influence and impact in our schools, in parishes that people have been at, in social ministries, in retreat ministries, in places that we're collaborating with, at universities, at hospitals, healthcare institutions. And what we're really being asked to is saying, okay, create those processes here too. It really is to impact every single person and the folks that we are blessed to be with, who are often not seen as mainstream, but on certain margins. So we use the language of yeast. Religious life is not meant to be the whole loaf of bread or the wheat even, but to be yeast and to say, are we hearing right now a call from the church to where we are called to be yeast? And what is it that we gain from being in these places? I would say we're constantly trying to listen to what are those needs, what are the cries. And it's a real call to me in this too, to say, I need to start going to some of the parishes and different parishes and places to listen to what the cries are, because that will shape my ministry, but it may shape my congregation and our region's priorities. We keep saying we want to hear those pieces, and so to learn and listen and to be in relationship. And I know many of you already are, but maybe it's saying, what other places do I need to go to listen and maybe hear different things? I think you've named too what religious offer in these spaces. And I think coming in there here's been our way of being church too, our way of discernment, our way of conversation, our way of making decisions through a discernment process. I think, these have been different religious life models that we've become very comfortable with, and they're asking something more of us. I think, you said there's a spirituality in this, and I think that's something religious orders can offer. And again, not that lay folks and clergy can't, but it is one of the pieces we bring to this. We will bring our particular charisms.
Yes, and you know that
way.
It's interesting because the religious life has a powerful structure all around society that is not limited to a parish. So imagine bringing all that to this moment in which the church needs to listen the society and not only people in the church. That's what the religious life can best do. Universities, schools, hospitals, so many institutions that are led by religious life, and they can do their own synodal consultation and processes as institutions, as groups elsewhere. So I think anywhere. So I think that's a challenge. To put another example, in Latin America, religious life, as you know, has been a powerful movement of change throughout the years. In social engagement, in political reflection. And right now, with the synodal process, it becomes a huge network where you can bring together people, institutions, groups, realities, and create spaces and mediations for this process to make it possible. So I think that by uniting the different religious orders in common projects, that will be, or at least will have the intent to be, a synodal way of working, and not to limit each congregation to do isolated the things. It's also to learn to work with other congregations, because it's synodality. Synodality is always to work with the one that is different than myself. And I cannot be only with the ones that are like myself, as myself. So I think the religious orders can also leave this moment and as a moment of including others in their own way of seeing and living and acting in the church and expanding that horizon. No? Clar uses a beautiful phrase in these past 2 years. They say we are in a process of re-signifying religious life through the incorporation of laity as a subject, not as an object. So this re-signifying, no, the relationships, the structures, I think this is a whole way that we have ahead to work with.
And that's something that in the United States context, there has been a lot of work with partners in mission or collaborators. But what you're really inviting us to is to say, what does that look like when everyone is an equal on the table engaging the church? And also religious orders are asking that, what and how, and those questions of the charism of religious life and doing this in common cause with the entire people of God. So I know women religious, I can at least speak to that. That has been a longstanding piece. And then it's going again, what more? What other ways? And so how do we together build the church that's being called forth? So it's a whole new project to say, how might we together on this? Because often we'll work on social issues. And now the Pope is asking us, the church is asking us, how can you contribute to this? And what would that look like? And, how might we? And a few people, asked ahead of time if I would say something about the work with USG and UISG. So just in, maybe 2 minutes, it's 4 of us that have the privilege of, we created a suggested process. Groups can use what they wish. And it went to all the leaders, the general superiors, the congregational leaders of women and men religious, that would be more the apostolic communities. And I saw Cardinal Gretsch has just invited the monastics to go more deeply and hold us in listening, conversion, and communion. So clearly the Pope is saying, and he said it to the religious orders, the Holy Spirit needs you. Let's offer what we can in this. And the process, and it's just a beautiful process actually that was sent to your general superiors, and they were invited to answer the question, do it with their general councils, to send it to provinces if you have provinces, to invite the whole congregation. And so, different groups are doing it differently. But we're hoping to get back from them that sense of what has been church for you. And we're trying to do it in terms of conversation as well, and asking the sense of, what have been the fruits, what have been the seeds, what have been the places of real fruitfulness as church? What has that experience been? But also, where have you found the weeds of being church here and being part of it? What have been the challenges? And then, what do you sense are the seeds moving us forward? This isn't the whole of it, but even inviting, and this is something for congregations, everyone, to send in images. What's your image? God doesn't, and thank God does not only work in words, but what's the vision? What's the image? And so at the end of, I can't remember, I think it's the end of March now, because the process has been made a little bit longer. We're inviting, and this would be 1,900 religious orders of women and 250 religious orders of men, to send in a 10-page or less, a sense of their prayer and discernment, and to really do it as an encounter with one another. And we're inviting groups to, have these processes across religious life and across many areas. But what we'll do with it then is read it, pray with it, and it'll be in a variety of languages, and also then come up with some synthesis, some way of listening deeply enough to hear what's coming forth from these areas. It doesn't limit the other groups, the local groups, anybody else, whole congregations from sending things in, but it's going to come from there, and it will go then to the men's communities, women's communities, but it'll also go to the synod on the synodality, as well as to the conference on the dicastery of consecrated life. So, and then the different USG and UISG will be doing things with that as well. So that's one of the pieces. I can fill you in more in spring. But what we wanted to do, if we could, to invite all of you that are here to find out, do you know, we have a little poll for you. It's simple. You just press yes or no. If you questions that we're asking are about whether you know if your diocese has a process in place, and whether you know if the parish you might attend has something in place, and whether you've heard yet about anything within your own religious order, if you belong to one, and if there's anything happening in your diocese for the religious. So Sonia, our highly capable IT guru, is going to put these questions, and we invite you just very briefly, click it, and we'll see what we find. So we'd like to hear from you.
So far, about 300 individuals have answered. So we'll give a couple more seconds for your first poll.
Yeah, give it a little more time. It's still coming. There's like 500 some already.
Maria, while we're doing that first poll, did you want to do any questions from the chat? I'm not sure if maybe kind of do some of those.
Sure. Let's see what we have here. A question is, how could this be in the process of formation? Formation on synodality to candidates for religious life, and beyond that, what would this look like in formation in our parishes as well? Do you have a thought on that? Can you, because you also teach in a school of theology and ministry, what would that look like? What would you love to see, Rafael?
Well, an experience also that is right now going on to put an example, in Latin America, is because I am involved in those experiences, is the reform of seminaries and faculties of theology too, which means that the pensa that has to be reviewed, which courses are we teaching? It's important, and we know that in some faculties of theology, Vatican II is practically absent. So if we're talking about synodality and there is a lack of ecclesiology in a faculty of theology, in a seminary, in a house of formation, it will make it more difficult, no? And then there is the other side, more practical. How do we incorporate techniques and practices of communal discernment? Because in a seminary, you don't learn how to discern in common, or in a house of formation, or in a faculty of theology. So we need to bring these practices also as a part of the formation of those who will be living as ministers in dioceses, in communities, in parishes, no? But one experience that I think is really important is to incorporate the connection between the community and the house of formation, the community and the seminary, the community and the faculty of theology. It's not forming for people for the community, like the community were an object to receive someone. It's forming together with the community. It's another conception of formation. Mm-hmm. So how do we link the communities to the centers of formation? That's a challenge, and that's a challenge that will address synodality.
Thank you for that. We have our first, I don't know if everybody can see it. I guess now you can see it, I hope. The first question, has your diocese announced a plan to invite participation? So we received yes from 392 people out of 604 and no from 212. If you were one of the yeses that your diocese has announced a plan, because we might have 10 people from Chicago, which has a plan, and would you just, if you're comfortable with that, put in the chat, like your diocese, so Diocese of Chicago, that would be great. And then we're going to then do our second question, and then I'm going to ask one of the questions that was sent to me. So please do it. The second question is, has your diocese announced, has your parish announced how it will participate in the synodal process? So just a yes, no. And Rafael, one of the questions here is also, Pope Francis wrote in 2014 that the distinctive sign of religious life is prophecy. In my experience, sometimes consensus-seeking processes seem to water down prophecy or lose unique ideas. How can we balance this during the global process of synodality? It's a great question.
Yes, and indeed, because it's not a mere intellectual consensus. It's not a consensus among those who have education or have studied theology. It's a consensus that needs to bring together people from different experiences and backgrounds. And an example that we have talked this before, because it's for me a shock of what a parish doesn't have to be, cannot be, is when you have little communities as bubbles that do not interact. So if you have the US Hispanic in the basement, then you have another community in the first floor and so on, and you make all these ways that are not simply Christian. And how do we bring that into a consensus would mean that they first have to sit together, see each other, treat each other, and that encounter maybe opens up a new way of seeing the reality of that church. But I cannot substitute an encounter with an ideology or an intellectual idea, and then I go there like the person that knows everything, no? So I have to leave the encounter with the other in the reality where the other is, and then from there the process begins in order to build a consensus. So consensus does not substitute personal relationships, because it is not a debate on who has more arguments to prove that it's right or wrong, no? It's building the relationships that permits and allows them to reach a common point, because the common point is the common good of the community. So I think it's a new culture, and that's a difficulty for us today.
And those, again, will be places we'll have to learn new skills and yes. Really engage this differently. And it will mean, because consensus could just, lets everyone agree, but this is going to be a long process. But Vatican II is also a long process. And, yes. and a piece of discernment is listening to, it may be that one voice that keeps reminding us that's the voice that's leading us to God at this moment. That's the voice. And it really requires, and it's one of the things, part of religious life is, and others, but certainly here we're speaking to religious life, is a life of prayer and discernment and even a process that will allow for that kind of deep listening, right? And then processes that allow for that vigorous discussion that's respectful, that really is seeking that unity, but not for this, at the cost of the real distinctiveness that's in the church. And I think we spoke, different places may choose different ways, and that's going to be part of this as well, is, you know, how shall we be community here? And religious orders know that too, that there's all kinds of ways, and yet where do we hold that? So with the parishes, 26% of the parishes, 26% of the people responding said yes to your parish has announced, and 74 have not heard anything yet. So this is a great invitation to go to your parish and saying, what are we doing if yours is one of the dioceses that has a plan going? May we have the third question, please? Third one, your religious congregation. So it may be early for it, but just a question: has your religious order yet announced a plan for this, or even that we will be doing something? So it doesn't have to be a full plan, but are you getting a sense that your congregation is saying, we're going to do this ourselves as well? So we're really talking about two different and maybe more ways. So both, what are we as religious hearing about that call of what our experience has been of church, and the fruitfulness and the weeds, and then what do we sense calling? So those conversations, so and what that means. And to add to the prophetic piece, it is going to be religious. We're not meant to be in the center. We're meant to be on those edges, listening to the, you know, edges of the tradition, and yet we are in the center of the tradition. So that walk that we will be walking, thank you for that question. We really need to look at this. Somebody else direct messaged me and said, you know, we collaborate on lots of kinds of things. The question is going to be, how will we hear the marginalized people? And, you know, another question is, how will we also be hearing the earth that's centered to us, but is on the margins of being cared for? You know, that Dr. Seuss story, who speaks for the trees? But, you know, how will we, what are some things you're hearing about how we will, I have some thoughts on that too, but how we will hear what's on the edges?
Yes, the challenge of going out of our own bubbles, it's how to reach out to the poor, to the victims, and to the outcasts of today, you know? And that has to be an option, because no one can impose us that, and an option that a community has to make, an option that the university has to make, that a school has to make. I remember one school of the Jesuits in Venezuela, that they started to offer the students the experience of working for a period of time in places where poor people were living. And just that encounter shift and change the life of those students, because it's when you see face to face the reality of the other, not when you read a book about the poor and how they live. So I think that synodality, as one of the liberation theologians, Pedro Trigo, says, is also working with the people understood not only as the people of God, faithful, but as the people poor, the poor of our world. No? So how can religious life in general, throughout all the institutions that religious life has, can embrace a new option for the poor, or renew the option for the poor today? No? You can see that easily in the options that in the case of a parish, no, that the parish has. I have seen parishes all over the world where you have the sacramental life and you have the social life of the parish together. And I have seen parishes only that offer sacraments, and there is not an engagement with the community and the life of the poor. So you are creating in this image a way of living religion and church in a private way, without any commitment to the poor, no? So how can religious life embrace a new model that renews the option for the poor and that at all levels, people could have this encounter with the real persons in the reality that they're living, that today are the majority of the poor. So it's a challenge, and it's part of the diaconia of synodality, the service to the world and to the poor that the synodal church must do.
No, and thank you for that. And that it's true. And that is one of the movements also of Vatican II, with the different religious orders going to what are the edges. And yet the document from a few years ago, New Wine, New Wineskins, that came out of the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, literally, thanks religious, and says, you have gone since Vatican II, before that too, but they were talking about Vatican II, you have gone to those edges, and we thank you for that. But there are new edges, there are new peripheries. And we're asking, would you be willing to go? Would you be willing? So even this, what you're saying, Rafael, is that, again, that invitation, because it is in many ways in our being, and part of our becoming was a gift of the Spirit, and it was in response to that relationship with God, charism, but also to respond for the needs of the church, the world. And so this is yet another opportunity, and as you said also, to do it even more widely with the whole people of God. So this is a call to consecrated life. So I thank you for that. In terms of religious congregations plans, it's almost half and half. We have 44% said they've at least heard something is going to happen, and 56 said no. So it's a wonderful opportunity then to say what might you want to, and how might you. And we're going to stop. That'll be our last question to go in there. And what I'd like to do now is invite, I ended up calling a variety of people and said, what are you doing in your diocese? Or I looked things up, and many of you were very kind to me. And what I'm finding is, like a Diocese of Philadelphia, the universities are planning on doing things together. And in another diocese, they're going to the farm workers and saying, that's one of the margins, that these are the people that, faithful people that don't get to the churches in the same way, and in this moment as well. So people are trying to ask, what do we do? How do we engage? So it is, and this is an invitation to all of our schools, because honestly, Pope Francis would like to hear from a 5-year-old as much as a 95-year-old, and as much a 95-year-old as a 45-year-old. So he is asking for everyone's voice. And so it's an appeal to all of us in our ministries. For me in Sacred Heart, our province, our 26 schools, to say, what would it be like for us to have a synodal process as well, and to then offer that. And a piece we're talking about as well is that, somebody asked me at one point, so we send something in, and do we wait then for the, Pope to respond, or the synod? And the answer is really no. There will be a response, but the hope is that there will be something that opens up in your context, in your parish, that you'll already be moving in, and then when the document comes back, you'll be testing it too and saying, there's more in here. But one of the people who's already been engaged in this, and we're blessed to have her, just to share a little bit, because early on in the synodal process, Sister Donna Ciangio of the Newark Archdiocese, a Dominican, a Caldwell Dominican, started from scratch, creating questions for her parish, creating processes. And so I'm wondering, Sister Donna, I know you're here somewhere, if you'd be willing to thank you for being with us from Newark, New Jersey, and just to share a bit of what your process is like and has been like.
So thank you very much for inviting me, and it's really with great pleasure that I have to be able to share this. So our processes in the Archdiocese of Newark, we have somewhere around 214 parishes. We have about 900 religious, 22 male congregations, 53 female congregations, and 4 or 5 mother houses. So that's just from the religious side. So that's giving you like a little bit of a snapshot. So one of the things that we did, the first thing was to call together our pastoral offices in the Archdiocese and to really talk. So we're talking about catechetics, school evangelization, LGBTQ, campus ministry, family life, persons with disability, worship office, and so on. I mean, we have a bunch of people who I'm calling our core team. One of the things that they have all done, so basically my background experience is really mostly in parish. I've actually been trying to work with synodal processes with parishes for most of my religious life in some way or other. And one of the things that the Cardinal had asked me to do was to put together training, get the parish councils off the ground. So fortunately, prior to the synod being announced, we were able to train over 100 parish pastoral councils. And there are some parish pastoral councils that do well. So when we were looking at this in terms of parishes, we were trying to get our parish pastoral councils to actually handle the synodal process in their parishes. So we were trying to empower them in this rather than us. So one of the things that we've done is created a lot of relationships with parishes and with pastors and so forth. So some of the remarks that Rafael made are very critical in terms of, I guess I could take another hour to talk about this, but in terms of parish leadership is critical. And I'm talking about the pastors in this way. Our parish leaders are, usually pretty good. They're off to the races with a lot of different things. And the people kind of feel like, well, what do we do? We can do this process, but where does it go? And how does it make a change? Okay. And that's a big concern that I have. So before I get into the religious life part, but, to look at parishes and to the whole thing that Rafael was talking about before, I think is so critical in terms of how are we actually forming pastors? Are we forming pastors or forming priests and even permanent deacons to live their vocation or to be spiritual leaders? So that's something there that, the people are very concerned about. So in this whole process too, one of the things that we highlighted was looking back over the last maybe 40 years in the diocese, how many synodal processes we all have going on, already going on. And, we really have a lot, but it hasn't been in successive generations of leadership, it isn't as strong as the Vatican II leaders. All right, so I think there's a lot of things that have to be done there. Someone just asked in the chat if I would share our processes, and I'm going to just hit my chat button here and send. Come on, go.
And you have your website is excellent.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to send.
It's 5
there
languages.
So on that website, so somebody asked earlier in the chat, like what are the questions? Well, the questions, if you look under on our webpage, you will see listening sessions, and under listening sessions, you'll see what the process is that we're using with parishes right now. And also under there, we now have just went up today, faith formation resources. So you were talking about little kids, and the stuff that our people have put out are fantastic. Schools should be up next week or for our campus ministries and so forth. And I just got an email now from a parish that's hosting an LGBTQ session. So, so we have a lot of different things going on there. So we're really pleased with that. And I think that the other thing is that in my position in the Archdiocese, I could be looked at as a bureaucrat in the diocese. But we've been able to, because we're out just this week alone, we've been with 3 different parishes. One was an affirmation about their plans. One was facilitator training, and table scribe training. And last week was a pastor who was resisting doing anything with the synodal process. And we managed to, through humor and fun and all kinds of stuff, I think we made a convert, okay? Plus his parish council was going to kill him. So anyway, if he didn't do something. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on like that. In terms of Hispanic ministry in the diocese too, they're doing an encuentro style of gathering. So theirs would be maybe something more like we might do in religious congregations, where you're taking a series of 4 or 5 sessions to really address something. So in my own congregation, there is a point person who is appointed and who happens to be my classmate. And so she said, can you help us design something? So I know in February for our study day, we'll come up with some kind of a process. But again, in religious life, as you noted a few times, Maria, and Rafael noticed as well, you know, we have, most of us have a history of what either we call conversation circles or contemplative things, you know, groups or whatever. And this is perfect. And not only that, in terms of the vowed religious, but also for our associates. Okay, so that's really a key thing for us as well. So we'll be putting together some kind of conversation, and a number of religious from dioceses around my diocese and New York have said, we're not doing anything, so can we do some of your stuff? And we're like, yeah, go ahead, take it. It's right, everything's on the website, it's all transparent, do whatever you need to do. Plus we put up videos explaining things, the information session videos up there. There's a video to use, a PowerPoint to use with your listening session. There's all kinds of stuff, you know, that's there.
It's great.
And I just think, you know, I really feel, and one of the sisters, we had a funeral today, and one of the sisters approached me and she said, you know, we first of all, we need to do something. And I said, yeah, we're doing something, don't worry. But then she said, you know, we also need to be in parishes, because we're going to come at things because of our experience in the church. Okay. And a lot of times religious are marginal, let's face it. Okay. And so how, you know, we have a lot to say, or we have a lot to add to a conversation that could help stimulate a conversation for people. Because I know it's going to come up in a lot of places. We need more emphasis on youth ministry. You know, we need more emphasis on this. We want to talk more about this. To try to get our people talking about deeper things is really where I think the religious could be a big help. Women's issues, divorced and remarried, all kinds of things. And some of our people in the parishes were raising some of that, but most, they weren't really thinking about that. They were thinking programmatically.
And thank you for that, because I think you're naming how, you know, there are certain groups that, you know, and parishes that have been doing these kinds of processes in different ways and others not. And so to give people resources for it, but also by mixing a variety of groups, we deepen one another. I mean, that's the gift
Definitely.
of that, and how to go about that in fine ways. And it is a call to religious to, you know, we keep saying it's all of our lives, and this is it's such a moment to say, all right, it's not an easy road, but neither was the road before us either. And that is our Christian call. That is our call as followers of Jesus, to be saying, what's the call? To build community, to be missionary disciples. How do we do this with the entire people of God? And I appreciate so much, Sister Donna, your wisdom in there. And I know people can reach out to you because your email is on your website as well.
Oh, it is. Oh no.
I did warn all of our folks that you know, people are gonna love what you're saying, both of you, and will be, you know, asking for your resources. And Rafael has a lot of articles also that are both in Spanish and in English that are helpful in this. And Donna, what you're doing on all those levels, and seeing and inviting is so key. And these are just examples because they're replete. I'm briefly checking the chat and realizing so many people are, involved in so many ways, and people want something deeper. People religious are willing to be about this, but are being asked, where do we go? And there is no guarantee on this except our fidelity is being called forth. And one of the things and it's going to invite us to ecumenical conversations. It's going to invite us to widen our hearts ever more. It is going to be our own experience of living the truth and what's calling us. And those of you saying in the United States, I saw the lines in there about, and we're so divided. This is that moment. This is exactly that moment. Yes, we are so divided, and we need new skills, and we've got to learn them. I teach a course on reconciliation and ethics, and you look at what's going on, and there's such a great need. If we do a synodal process, narratives will show up, truth telling will show up, listening will show up, all those pieces. And if they're not showing up, we have a role to play in. Isn't there another way? Can we do this in a prayerful way? Because when Cardinal Gretsch and both of you are saying this is a conversion process, we're all being called to conversion. I am, and all of us are, every single person. So it's going to invite a new way because we're in need of it. And it's not just because of the crisis, but this crisis takes some of the blinders off. And Pope Francis has said, a crisis, we will not come out the same. We come out better or worse. And so there's really an invitation, a choice to be made, a call. And we can't do this. I can't do this alone. We have to do this together. And I think that's why 1,200 people registered, because we know something is calling. We know the structures need transformation. We know we need something more, and that we can't do it, any of us alone, but that we can be part of this process because religious have known long processes. And I'm not talking just about our meetings. I'm talking about our ways of being, and knowing that things will take maybe, and probably this will take beyond my lifetime, beyond our lifetimes. But it's worth it. Look at what went on before, and well before that. This is part of that process. And and I just want to use maybe as a point of hope, and I know we're near at the end of our time, and I'm going to give Rafael one last word, but I'm going to offer us just a quote from John Lewis, a congressman deceased in the past year. When we think this road is so difficult, people asked him, how did you manage? I mean, look at racism, look at this. And this was near the end of his life. How do you do this? And in his book, Across That Bridge, he writes this. And it's about his vision for change. Faith to me is knowing in the solid core of your soul that the work is already done, even as an idea is being conceived in your mind. It is being as sure as you are about your dreams, as you are about anything you know as a hard fact, how to get to your car. Faith is being so sure of what the Spirit has whispered in your heart that your belief in its eventuality is unshakable. Nothing can make you doubt that what you have heard will become a reality. Even if you do not live to see it come to pass, you know without a doubt that it will be. That is faith, unquote. That's also hope. And that's what we're going at this with, that deep hope in a God that helps us see beyond what even looks possible, but toward what is really God's vision. And that's what we're about here. And I'm grateful you're here. Donna, I'm grateful for your wisdom and time here. And Rafael, my brother, I'm so grateful that you're bringing your wisdom and experience here. And do you have a few last words or exhortations to us?
No, I just remember Karl Rahner, after the council, said that the day in which we as a church forget to pray together, to eat together, to talk among us, that in that day the church would lose its real meaning, no? Because it's about living in a communal way, no? I just see this moment of the church as a moment not only of a personal conversion, but a structural reform. The two things should go together. And the expectations that we may have, which always will be high, have to be put in the context of the expectations of each local church all around the world. Because my local church is not the only one, and it's not the best one, and it's not the one that found the solutions. So we need to embrace the reality of a church of churches, a church with a diversity in expectations even, and how can I learn from the others of what I have in my own practice missing, and the reciprocity, you know, how can others learn from my own way of being and living as a church. But the only thing I would say is that to look beyond our localities, because that is not the way of being church. The model in which we are right now is a church of churches. It's not anymore this universalistic Roman church that is leading the path to all the churches, local churches in the world. And a church of churches means that my local church is as important as the other local church. So the only way to move is to learn from each other and build this reciprocity, which is at the end synodality. And synodality is for me what Pope Paul VI said when he was opening the second inauguration of the Second Vatican Council, when he said to look for a more complete way of being church. Synodality is that more complete way of being church. So let's build it.